wow. I'm not moving. I'm just like holding breath. Yeah.
Okay. I'll be the MC today.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining us this morning. And for those of you who are tuned into the live stream, apologies, we're starting a little bit later. This is an event that has been, is a derivative of a workshop that we've been doing for the past 2 days. So one of our speakers is not here yet. Hopefully she'll join us soon, Nasim Zara. And it's probably because we just overworked her in terms of analysis over the last 2 days. We're an exhausting bunch, but my hope is that she'll join us sometime during the program. And if not, we have a fantastic lineup to start with anyways. So title of this event today, or this meeting, is Competitive Security Dynamics in Southern Asia, Conflicts, Challenges, and Choices. And we have a star-studded lineup of analysts from the region, from South Asia, to provide their insights on the nature of these dynamics, their evolution over time, their impact and consequence, particularly for Washington. I'd say the genesis of this idea for this meeting began maybe about a year ago when we thought to ourselves, well, the Simpson Center spends a lot of time thinking about competitive and crisis dynamics in South Asia. 2019 will be the 20th anniversary of the Kargil conflict. I recognize it's not as significant maybe in South Asia as it is in DC, but the reason it's a focal point for us is, one, it's the thing that we do here at the Simpson Center, but also I think it was a time that really galvanized Washington's attention in South Asia based on the risks and dangers that were perhaps always there, but perhaps we were far less attentive to. It's certainly what drew my attention to studying South Asia over time. So we're coming on this 20th anniversary, and it so happens that we also have this crisis that played out in February, the Balakot Pulwama crisis between India and Pakistan, where for the first time there were airstrikes on each other's territory and on Pakistani territory proper. And it was a pretty big set of events that I think, again, sort of drew attention back to South Asia. U.S. interest in the region has been enduring for the last 20 years, principally because of our deployments, our presence in Afghanistan. And so that tends to shape most of how we think about, or at least consumes most of the oxygen when it comes to thinking about South Asia. And all other interests or dynamics tend to be structured from that, or have been for quite a while. But at the same time, we do have other interests. Washington and the United States has other interests in the region. Besides our enduring, or what has been almost a 20-year true presence in Afghanistan and a counterterrorism sort of interest in Afghanistan, we've also had an interest in the balance of power in Asia. And so today it's maybe crystallized better in the Indo-Pacific strategy, but there have been moves toward this direction for the last 3 administrations. The Obama administration had the pivot to Asia, and prior to that, the Bush administration had a lot of moves, particularly in terms of building a relationship with India. So we've been moving in this direction for quite a while. It's also been enduring strategic interest, sometimes abutting and sometimes conflicting with other interests in the region. And the third is the one I just alluded to when we talked about Kargil, which is the interest of the United States to ensure that conflicts or crises do not escalate to the point of nuclear danger. The interest of the United States to prevent, as Michael Crepon says, prevent a mushroom cloud from appearing on the subcontinent. And that there are different accounts of sort of what the probability, the risk of that is. But for U.S. policymakers, it has always been a concern, dating back to when the CIA director in 1993 testified in front of Congress, suggesting that the most likely place for use of weapons of mass destruction would be South Asia. Even if it's a low probability, it is the most likely of all the dyads that we see in the world. And I'd say today, the India-Pakistan dynamic is one of the few places in the world where you actually see 2 nuclear powers regularly exchanging fire across the border. So again, draws our interest and is a source of consequence for the United States. So given all those interests, and given the fact that we are in maybe a unique time, you could say, the recent crisis, as I said, in February, the talk of a potential U.S. or the actual possibility of a U.S. drawdown in Afghanistan, the negotiated settlements agreements that was almost, we were on the cusp of with the Taliban, maybe is held in abeyance for a while, but certainly I don't think anyone in Washington thinks that that's not the direction we're going at some point in the future. And then certainly China's presence in South Asia, which has made it a much more competitive environment. All these dynamics, I think, are sort of coalescing together, and it makes it a good time for us to check in with scholars and analysts and practitioners from the region to understand how they see these dynamics unfolding and what it means for their respective countries, but also for Washington. So I'm going to introduce our panel, and then the plan of the day is that we are going to have some opening remarks from each of the panelists, and then we will just dive into some Q&A with the audience. So I'll go in alphabetical order. So to the second from the, I have to do my left and my right. Second from the left is Dr. Rabia Akhtar, who is the director of the Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research at the University of Lahore. She received her PhD from Kansas State University and has recently published a book, The Blind Eye, U.S. Nonproliferation Policy Towards Pakistan from Ford to Clinton. And Dr. Akhtar is also a member of the Prime Minister's Council, Foreign Advisory Prime Minister's Council, and though she's operating in her own independent capacity today, but that is to sort of underscore the importance of her insights here today. To my left is Suhasini Haider, who is probably one of the foremost diplomatic correspondents and journalists in India. She's diplomatic editor for The Hindu, one of India's most respected and widely read English dailies. And I think she's just a constant fountain of insight into what's really going on beneath the surface of geopolitics in the region, not just in South Asia, but I'd say Asia writ large, and understanding that the relationships between India and China, India and Pakistan, India and Russia, and the United States as well. So great power politics more generally. To her left is Brigadier Feroz Khan, who's a research professor at the Department of National Security Affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School. He's a former brigadier in the Pakistan Army with experience on the line of control in Siachen Glacier. He last served as Director of Arms Control and Disarmament Affairs at the Strategic Plans Division, and he's a no stranger to the Stimson Center. Has been a longtime friend and collaborator, and I don't know, general thinker on these subjects that we were talking about today. To his left is Vice Admiral Vijay Shankar, former Commander-in-Chief of the Strategic Forces Command in India, and also former Commander-in-Chief of Andaman and Nicobar Command and Flag Officer, sorry, not to his left, further to his left. I apologize. I was like, why is everybody laughing? A little discombobulated this morning. Point being, he served in the Indian Navy for over 45 years, retired about 10 years ago, and has also been one of the most prolific writers and thinkers on strategic issues in South Asia. And to his left, and I'm right on this one, is Naseem Zahra, who's a national security specialist and prominent journalist and author. Her most recent book is From Kargil to the Coup, which is a phenomenal read. I spent a good summer reading it last year and take copious notes on it because it is one of the most insightful books on the Kargil War, which I talked about earlier this morning. She holds degrees from Quaid-i-Azam University and Tufts University, and she served as an honorary capacity in the following committees and positions: as the President's Advisory Committee in Foreign Affairs and National Security, a member of the Kashmir Committee, Pakistan Special Envoy on UNSC reforms. And so we have a star-studded cast, and at this point I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to my colleagues. And initially I'd planned for Naseem for you to start first. Are you ready to get going?
Naturally.
There we go. So 8 minutes apiece for our panelists, and then we'll
I
dive
didn't
in.
come running, so I should manage. Just let me. Okay. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Samir, for organizing this. Been a great 2 days. This is the third day, and I think what better time to organize something like this than a time when South Asia is going through one of its most exciting times. So let me start by just making a few points. We have what, 6, 7, 8 minutes?
8 minutes.
8 minutes, okay. So I think I'd like to divide what I'm going to say in 3 different parts. First and foremost, I think I'd start with the Pakistan-India situation. I think if we look at the developments of August 5th, I think which is annexation of Kashmir and that's the most critical development I think that's taken place in a long time, and the response thereof of the Kashmiris, and the fact that there is a near lockdown 45 days down the road, and quoting from what Indian writers, including retired Indian generals, are saying. Some of the Indian generals are saying, I think that it's, and I'd like to quote here that as the spontaneous shutdown in Kashmir, sponsored and guided by no established political entity, unionist or separatist, stretches for more than a month, the final exchange between India and Pakistan over Kashmir is expected anyway. So the realization that it's not something that is controlled by Pakistan, and the old theme kind of doesn't quite cut here, but I think it's the response of the Kashmiris and the fact that as of now life is far, far from normal, and this is all based on what Indian writers and Western writers are reporting. And connected with that, the fact that the J&K police chief Dilbag Singh said only a few days ago to Indian Express, he said when he talks about the militants, when he's asked how many militants are active at the moment, he says their numbers are not very high, but their movement has been notable. About 150 in South Kashmir and 250 or so overall. So I'm quoting the J&K police chief. He says there are about 250 militants. Hence, obviously, the question as to if there are only 250 militants, then what is creating a situation where thousands and thousands of, pick a number, 20, 30, 40, 50, thousands of security forces are there, security and paramilitary forces, and how are they not able to bring or ensure life coming back to normal? So is it something that the Kashmiris are saying very clearly, Kashmiris in Indian occupied Kashmir, and the fact that all of India's friends, Kashmiri friends of the past, are now all in prison. Only yesterday, I think 2-3 days ago, there's an actual police case now registered against Umar Abdullah's father as well. And so all of these who were allies in the past are all behind jail, etc., behind bars. So hence, what happens when India eases the pressure? And in some reports, it suggests that even though there is no curfew, people are not coming out. In some cases, the communication lockdown and so on and so forth. This situation obviously will have to change, at some point, and when it changes, again using terms from the Indian press, that something is going to blow up, there's going to be a major response and reaction, and naturally that will impact Pakistan-India relations, there's no question about it. This whole, the developments after August 5th reinforce something, a reality which India has on and off denied. I don't think that it would be, on and off denied so that Vajpayee and Nawaz Sharif actually engaged to deal with the Kashmir issue. But now we are looking at a situation where the Indian foreign minister plus the Indian army chief, you can refer to these as political statements, but they're not coming from people sitting on the sidelines. These are coming from policymakers who are saying, Pakistan-occupied Kashmir is what really has to become part of India as well. So, what happens once the situation opens up? What happens in the relationship? And the Simla agreement stands completely abrogated because there's, if you read the Simla Accord of 72, there is, it says very clearly that no material change will take place. Obviously, on and off, we've seen India occupying Siachen, Pakistan blundering on Kargil, and then post back and forth. But this level of, completely integrating it and repealing Article 370, etc. So those are all matters of detail. I think that that's one major development that I would say in some ways, if it can be a development that provides an opportunity to open up and engage, it can be a development which can take us towards greater antagonism and greater and kind of more insecurity in the region. We have now, obviously, what is very clear is that there is no response from the global community, and we've had, what is it called, a consultation over this question in the UN Security Council, but nothing more. I think, by and large, India enjoys the tacit support of most of the countries globally. There are some countries which have spoken up against it, but I think that what happens on the ground is going to be critical. How the Kashmiris deal with this situation, how they respond with this, and coming back to the Simla Agreement, the significance of the Simla Agreement basically, in some ways becoming null and void means what happens then along the LOC, the line of control. Does it, because the sanctity of the line of control, all that I said, between Kargil and Siachen and so on and so forth, it has on and off been violated, but this time around, will the Kashmiris from across the LOC in AJK, etc., what action will they take, etc., is going to be important, and we have had in the past, obviously, in 89 in a similar situation, not a similar situation when the uprising took place. We know what happened after that, people going from across the LOC. So I think that that factor can't be ruled out, and hence the question of what happens unless India and Pakistan engage in a dialogue, unless there is some situation. I mean, the big question is whether there will be a reversal. Obviously, majority feel that there will be no reversal to the situation, and if there's no reversal, I think the primary influencing factor will be how the Kashmiris deal with it, and obviously Pakistan is a party to this, and Pakistan is a party in more than one ways, and obviously Pakistan is not going to sit back. And the last that we heard from the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister and the army are on the same page on this one, and on everything, in fact. So, so the Prime Minister, he addressed a gathering in Azad, Jammu Kashmir, and he said, let me come back from the UN and let me see what happens, and then I'll tell you whether to cross the LOC or not. So what I'm saying is that built into this situation is greater instability, greater tension, etc., unless something changes. The other point is obvious.
One last minute, and we gotta keep on moving.
One more minute, okay. So, well, the other point, I'll just then allude to it, the build-up, the nuclearization of South Asia. I think we often underestimate the speed at which there is nuclearization going on. India and Pakistan, both India sees its link with, containment of China, and so in partnership with the US, and Pakistan, obviously, in response to all that, is developing its own low-yield nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons that it feels should be able to target every corner of India for its own security, their own specific doctrines. Very quickly, on the other very important, I think, development is where the Taliban potential and possible agreement has gone. For now, everything seems to be on hold. Mr. Trump, the President of the United States, tweeted that it's called off, so it's been called off for now. Obviously, it means that, and why was it called off? Various theories. The immediate reason being the attack, but obviously within the US administration, there deep state exists everywhere. So between CIA, Pentagon, etc., the difference is, one is that, the other is the attack. I mean, attacks have been taking place since there's no ceasefire. There's been attacks from both sides, and the Indian army has been attacking, and supported by US Air Force, etc., and so of the Taliban. And there is division within the Taliban as well. Pakistan's role of delivering Taliban to the table, they've done what they could have, and I think that beyond that there are other problems of the Afghan government and the Taliban sitting down and talking. And I think, let me just, I don't want to take up more time. These are the two major
you
issues.
put a lot on the table. How about we'll get to more of that in Q&A.
Yeah,
I
that's
just
it.
want to make
I'm
sure we
done.
get to everyone.
I'm done.
Fantastic. All right, Admiral Shankar.
I thought you were going to time yourself.
No, I'm going to cut short my time, I assure you.
I will be a ruthless timekeeper.
Good.
I left a minute for you though.
There's a great gentleman there. He bows before ladies. Good thing. Anyway, Sameer,
Put
I'd
him
like
on
to
the
thank
defensive
you.
already.
Thank you for the last 3 days. It's been very exciting, very interesting, very, should we say, a learning process. And I must congratulate your staff for the excellent bandobast, the excellent organization of these events. There were quite a few that we were a part of. There is no respite given to a senior citizen. As you notice, I was actively involved in 5, something like that. But getting to the point, I think the first point I'd like to flag is the nightmare situation that we are facing in India. And that is a military that owns a state in bed with jihadists. The series of terrorist attacks that have occurred in India have a common thread. Not so much in form, not so much in what occurred, but in the sense of a state sponsoring these jihadists. That is an issue, whether it is Mumbai, Kalachok, whether it's Balakot, whether it's the attack on Parliament. These are issues that we believe have to find resolution. We have shown in the earlier phase of a certain amount of restraint in our response. In fact, during Kargil, there were clear-cut orders to the military that you will not cross the LOC, and whatever action had to be taken against what was an invasion. Northern Light Infantry coming in with arms, ammunition, and a purpose. However scatterbrained you may consider it, but there was a brigade-sized operation there. The fact that we had to evict them, and the fact that it comes so close on the wake of the Lahore Declaration, flags another issue, the credibility of that state, of Pakistan. How do we believe them? Who do we negotiate with? Just a few months, not few months, just as the declaration was signed, plans for the invasion by the military, dressed as God knows what, were underway. The fact that they had already occupied posts by February, March of that year is a telling point, and therefore there is always an issue of credibility of the Pakistani state, and more important, who do we talk to? Do we talk to the army? No politician would be willing to do that. The third point I'd like to flag is we are also within a tripolar tangle there. There is a great collusion on the nuclear, on the military front between China and Pakistan, while we have, I would say, a certain element of harmony in our own doctrines between India and China, nuclear doctrines. We find that this using Pakistan as a cat's paw, as has been done with Korea, is suggestive of certain doctrinal links. Don't leave just as yet, I've not finished.
You think you're that important that I'm going
No,
to
I'm
leave
not.
because of you? No, it's just the cold air.
Yeah.
I can't deal with that, too cold.
Yeah, thank you. Uh, uh, so where was I? So there is this tripolar issue that we are up against. We must understand that the entire nuclear weaponizing program in Pakistan, the blueprint was drawn up in China. It was tested in China, and perhaps it also set into motion the proliferation that occurs as a part of A.Q. Khan's network. We can't forget all these incidents. We also can't forget that A.Q. Khan is actually, in my words, corporatized the idea of nuclear weapons. More on this during Q&A. As far as the numbers of militant passing mention was made, I would just like to remind people that it took 7 suicidal jihadists to bring down the World Trade Center and cause 3,000 casualties. So please maintain that ratio, and then if you multiply 250 by that amount, you'll realize what it takes to locate these guys, weed them out, particularly when there is a state sponsoring them. Inasmuch as the American mediation is concerned and their presence in Afghanistan is concerned, I think the general feeling is a premature pullout would in fact be a destabilizing factor. To leave Afghanistan as it is, I'm afraid, may actually create a larger hotbed for the jihadists. Please, I was only joking.
I was joking as well.
Would actually leave a situation where a breeding ground, a very, very fertile breeding ground for the bad guys would come up. And therefore, I'm not too sure, after having come in, the sudden, it's not an urgency after all. America has been there now almost coming on to 2 decades. It's probably their longest war. But the fact of instability arising as a matter of the dynamics of moving out is, I think, something that we'll have to face. Don't forget that our consulate there was attacked at Mazar-e-Sharif, and the same bad guys, jihadists, Jaish-e-Mohammed was behind that. The last point I'd like to make is to say that Article 370, it's should we say, non-operationalization is the root cause of everything. Hold it, just a minute. The accession of Kashmir was the accession of the entire Kashmir, which the princely state had decided through the monarch who was there, through the prince who was there. When Hari Singh signed the document of accession, it was for all of Kashmir. And therefore, to talk of Pak-occupied Kashmir as a part of that larger, should we say, document or larger agreement is a fact. These are well-known facts. That there was an invasion even then using what you'd like to call non-state operators, but no, all the jihadis who are coming in are backed by the state. They are state-sponsored. And that is the worrisome bit. So from the accession, we move on to the UN, Article 47. I keep hearing this refrain about plebiscite in Kashmir. There are certain conditions laid down in the UNSC Security Council Resolution 47. The first of which is demilitarize the occupied sector. The second of which is pull back the demographic changes that you've brought about in Kashmir. Thereafter, India is to draw down its military presence in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and then go for a plebiscite. These are the provisions. Now, unfortunately, Kashmir, certain portions of the northern extent of that hapless state have been ceded to China. So you've got another complication in this part of the world, and therefore for anyone to say that the UN Security Council is where we're going to go for this plebiscite, please see the facts, draw back, and then we'll look at plebiscite. The last
Admiral,
point.
I think we gotta keep getting everyone into this conversation. So I promise we'll come back to you.
The
on more of
last
this.
point that I'd like to make, remember there was an onside humorous moment.
You get 1 extra minute for that.
So 1 minute for that. Quality of humor. The last point I'd like to make is, what do we see in the future? Do we see more of it? I recall an interaction with a former member of the SPD in similar circumstances, where he said it's going to be a 1,000-year war. 1,000-year war, I mean, you can't be serious when you are dealing with this. But the future does not look very bright. There is a certain bleakness. There are certain internal factors. Remember the Constitution of India, which actually wrote 370 after partition, is an internal document. And unfortunately, the state of Pakistan never recognized Article 370 of our Constitution. And today it come about saying that is the linchpin is worrisome. Is an internal issue. We will handle it as best as we can. We are considerate of the nature of the situation, and we believe that order will, at least will attempt to establish order in that state, and indeed a situation where we are in control there.
Thank you. We have a lot of bleakness. Perhaps Brigadier Khan can tell us any cause for optimism
On my turn.
in 8 minutes.
My turn now?
It is your
Oh, I
turn.
thought it was, okay. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me here. And by the way, that former SPD officer was not me.
No, it wasn't you. No, it wasn't.
So I speak.
But you
neither
were
on-
present there.
So I don't speak on behalf of the Pakistan government or the US government. I'm here to speak on my own and as a professor. You know, I just finished teaching a course called Geopolitics in Southern Asia, and most of my students were actually looking at these points that you probably laid down, you know. And as a former student of late Dr. Brzezinski says, when you look at geopolitics, you always look at the big picture. It's like, to him, it's like a chessboard, and everything affects the other. And for a long time, we have been looking at that the system level rivalry is going to actually shift down to the cascading effect into the region. It's that the region affects that great power politics, but it's the other way around as well. And this has been the case throughout the 70 years of history in which this whole problem of Kashmir has been embedded. But then we really go back down, deep down into the two-nation theory and all. I won't go down there. But I think it was one of the fundamental reasons at the time when our forefathers used to talk, my grandfather used to talk. We sit alike, we talk alike, we eat alike, we nearly dress alike. There is so much of 1,000 years of cultural synthesis that has happened in South Asia. The only thing we don't agree is that we read different histories on the same page. You just heard one history, you know. Now I don't want to go over a counter history because that's going to take bulk of my 8 minutes.
We don't have that kind of time.
No, and neither that have the time, you know. But you know, so there's one part of the history that you heard. I won't say that, but the fact is that now we get back to the current situation. That's what you asked us to do. So I'm looking at these 4 points that are going to be effective where U.S. policy is going to be involved. The 21st century was supposed to be a great power politics until 9/11 changed that. And that is where the whole functional situation changed as far as the state of Pakistan was concerned. That became front, right, center to defeat that part. From a military standpoint, that completely changed the configuration of the military that was focused single-handedly on one front in Pakistan military, Eastern Front, to deal in the post-nuclear test environment. And that was the evolution period of what to do with the nuclear tests that Pakistan did. Evolving doctrines, evolving command and control systems, getting into that was the focus at the time when those forces were turned onto the western border. And any military, people sitting here would know that conventional militaries to transit to it takes a significant amount of time to actually transit to a different role. So today when we are fighting, a Pakistani military is fighting at two different fronts with different roles. And even when it is facing one front, one portion has to fight a high altitude battle from Siachen down the line of control. One kind of army has to fight battle in the deserts. One kind have to fight in semi-mountainous in a very frontier terrain on Afghanistan. And that's where the country is split into two front situation in Pakistan. While this is going on, there is a third dimension that has happened lately. And this is a big factor that is going to affect all politics. And we haven't talked about since yesterday. That's called BRI, Belt Road Initiative, and the CPEC, and the implication of that. With these three major factors going on, there's a fourth element is, and I would have probably said something very different were it not that President Trump himself decided to stop the negotiation going on with the Taliban. And now we do not know whether that negotiation is going to be a protracted one, and how long, when it is going to restart. For now, we are seeing that the Afghan front, it looks like there will be elections, and after the elections, the point whether Afghanistan, Taliban will agree to have an intra-dialogue with Afghanistan, or whether they'll ceasefire. These are the two elements that are stuck there. They probably have a good idea about what the timelines of US withdrawal will be. Perhaps there may not be withdrawal at all now. So we have seen the Afghan front remains as it is for the time being. So what is the challenge for Pakistan under these circumstances? The big change that has happened is Kashmir comes in that context now. If you look into from a security perspective, anybody sitting and doing planning, they are looking at this situation. What is the next move now? At the external front, it is quite clear to all analysts that the international community does not have a dog in the Kashmir fight. We have seen what has happened. So the Indian government is under no external pressure to do anything. The only pressure will be internal, and there are two kinds of pressures that could come on the Modi government. One is, once the lid is off, we will then know what's going to happen. So we don't know what we don't know. 45 days is less, we'll know what's happened. And the other thing is that there could be a face-saving position for Prime Minister Modi, and that could be India's Supreme Court. They may declare this illegal, and maybe that we can have some opportunities of reversing what has happened now. Highly unlikely, but there's one more thing that I would say, and I've been saying on the sideline, and people urged me to say that, and I'm going to say that now. And I'm very blunt on this. This would mean this is a situation that now the LOC between Pakistan and India is looking like what it looked to India in 1950 when the Chinese came at the Tibetan border. That's the kind of situation now. And as if that was have been some thinking within the Pakistani security management thinking, they made it very easy for them after the foreign minister, who was supposed to be a most level-headed person as far as the Pakistanis knew, made a statement of saying that now the jurisdiction, the issue is only about the jurisdiction of the part that Admiral Shankar just mentioned about that. Now that jurisdiction part is far more complicated than it would look maybe 1972 or any other time in history. That's a very different implication. There is nothing left for negotiation for Pakistan now, in my view. If somebody wants to say we can start a talk with Pakistan, I don't know what Islamabad points will be there, because there's nothing left to negotiate now, unless the situation changes. It is in that context. Admiral Shankar is right. Article 370 is India's internal matter, because Pakistan never believed in the instrument of succession in the first place. So for them, it doesn't matter what it is. But what it does is that it brought Kashmiris on the same page, as far as we know now, that even those Kashmiris who had joined India willingly are now opposed to that. That's a big deal, and that's where I don't think anybody is focused here. Maybe Howdy Modi, whatever happens, but that's the place we will know after that. So we don't know what's going to happen on that front, but here is what this means, that if you cannot get it legally, which you cannot probably there's going to be a different kind of warfare on the line of control that we have seen in the last 70 years. And it's most likely, and I'll give me a minute, because why I'm saying this. You see, what the line of control today is, and this is for younger people to know. The line of Kashmir was called ceasefire line as of 1st January 1949. After the 65 war, Tashkent Declaration happened. Both forces moved back to the same line that was as of January 49. But when the 71 war happened, the border that exchanged on the Kashmir side was never returned back to the 1949, and that became the line of control. And that line of control was actually sort of, I would say, indemnified under the Shimla Accord. So that became the line. And the question since then is that line sacrosanct or not? The international community does not recognize and does not say it openly whether this is a real border between India and Pakistan, but actually behaves as if it's de facto. So now, with the jurisdiction being claimed by India, that would mean use of force. And use of force in the Kashmir terrain, and as you heard my resume, I've commanded from Siachen down to the lowest level in Kashmir. That's going to be a very, very tough fight. There's no way you can capture Azad Kashmir even if the whole of the Indian army comes there. It's going to be a very bloody war. But what could happen in the process, and I know that a large number of line of control position is that most of the places India is on the higher ground, because that's a layer of ground like that. The rivers are flowing into Pakistan. So this is going to be a salami slice tactics, that everything, any border war could happen, they would capture some territory and never return back. Liberated, this is part of India, Jammu and Kashmir. That is going to be the pattern of consistent war and taking back, attack, counterattack, attack, counterattack. And this is not going to be in isolation, given how 65 war happened, given how other wars happened. That would mean that the border, international border from Sialkot down to Karachi will remain under stress all the time. I'm really creating a situation that could happen, I have nothing nice to say, I'm telling you now. So now we are looking at the South Asia border, India-Pakistan border, as a fortified border that would look pretty much like Fulda Gap or like East-West in Europe. At the peak of Cold War, we are heading in that direction, in the opposite direction. And I'm not trying to scare you. You will see that this is the direction where things are moving. Whether or not the tactical weapons become in the process or not is another matter, but that is where the direction is actually going. And I've not even talked about the sea and other issues right now.
We'll get to those in a little bit, I'm sure.
So I've scared you enough?
Yeah, I asked for optimism, and you gave me the Fulda Gap, so thanks.
That's what can happen. And that's what the world should worry about. The last thing, 1 minute I could say.
No,
By the
no,
way,
no,
just
no.
one.
That was not an invitation. No.
Let me finish on that. This border
Very
that I
briefly.
said fortified is, by the way, also the border of Indo-Pacific and CENTCOM. Let's talk about that.
We will. So, with that, we're going to turn it over to Suhasini to offer your 8 minutes that should not exceed 10 minutes.
I'll certainly try, and I have to thank Stimson Center for inviting us here and for having these very engaging conversations, which make us look back at where we are compared to how others look at us at a certain time. I should also perhaps say that we're complimented by the fact that you thought 2 of us Indians were enough to take on the 3 Pakistanis, but we would have liked to have had the last word as well. The truth is, we can get back into India-Pakistan history, but we have to actually look at the world as it is and what is informing our leadership at the present. Everybody has pointed out the moment of August 5th and the government's decisions on Article 370 and Kashmir as a possible flashpoint. But I would argue that we're actually looking at a progressive situation, which is part of many things. I don't want to start in 1940, 50, 60, 70, whatever. I'd like to start just with the last few years. And if you look at the kind of attacks India has faced from Pakistan and the sort of responses to them, this should tell you exactly where this is headed. The truth is that when the Pathankot attack happened, and you might be familiar with it, but an attack by terrorists on an Indian forward base, Many of our airplanes could have been under risk. The lives of army officers and their families who lived on the base could have been at risk. India's reaction at the time was, let's try to figure out if we can actually change the paradigm between India and Pakistan. Start with joint investigation. That really went nowhere. And even to date, in Pakistan, which had actually offered to file a case, there is absolutely no movement in that case. And I make it because of a point. I'm not trying to make this a part of a rant. I'm just saying if you look at the progression of reactions, we came to the Uri attack, an attack on an army base, soldiers sleeping in the night. At least 20 were killed. And right next to this line of control that everyone seems to be very worried about inflaming. And India's reaction was to announce that they had carried out what India referred to as surgical strikes, but essentially said, we have crossed the line of control. We have sent our soldiers across the line, which is a UN-monitored line. There was not just no pushback, the world actually applauded India, because the world has seen how India has dealt with the terror issue, and that's what happened. Cut to 2019, the Pulwama attack in February this year. A bombing of a convoy of soldiers, which led to at least between 40 and 50 dying. And it was followed by India announcing and carrying out bombings on Pakistan. Not POK, not disputed territory, but in Pakistani territory. And there was honestly very little pushback there as well. There are concerns around the world, but it hasn't changed anything. So you come to this scenario and you look at the decision on 370. I have to say, as an Indian, I am actually extremely pleased to hear Pakistanis speaking about the validity of 370 and the taking away of 370 and the Shimla Agreement, which frankly we haven't heard much from the Pakistani side for the last few years. But India was informed by what is happening now. The leadership is not just informed by what was happening 50 years ago. What is happening now is a threefold trend around the world. The threefold trend is essentially the retrenchment of the United States, of Pax Americana, and the international rules-based order, which nobody speaks about anymore. Everybody is basically doing their own thing. And there is no sort of Robocop, World Cop around. The United Nations certainly is not that anymore. So we're looking at a post that situation. The second is the rise of China, which for India, remember, takes on a threefold threat, because we have the 3,000 plus kilometer boundary with China. We have maritime situation, especially with the Indo-Pacific strategy coming into play. And we have China's inroads in our own neighborhood in South Asia, even if you kept Pakistan out. The other neighbors of India are increasingly seeing a Chinese presence. So that's our threefold threat that we have to deal with. You have the retrenchment of the international world order and Pax Americana, you have the rise of China, and then you have populist governments around the world that are essentially making foreign policy a factor of their domestic mandate. Why should India be any different from the rest of the world? Prime Minister Modi has just won one of the rare mandates in our country, which has often seen governments put together with coalitions and compulsions, and instead he has won a mandate bigger than the one he won in 2014. And that is what he is answering to over here. So that is the greater context of what we're seeing in this. When it comes to 370 itself, the truth is, as a journalist, I cannot be happy with a situation that keeps any of my countrymen under a communication lockdown or detains leaders who are political leadership in that region. But the truth is that this is something that can be done at this time. It is also something that is informed by what is happening in Afghanistan. Look back to just 2 weeks ago. Here in Washington, everybody fully expected that there was going to be a deal between the US and Taliban, which we believe certainly is a proxy for Pakistan and for the Pakistani military establishment. And then the president himself reveals that not only is there a deal in the making, but that the Taliban itself, that housed the entire Al-Qaeda leadership during 9/11, was going to be at Camp David. Tell me how India is to react to this kind of idea. Now, clearly, there was intelligence long before of what kind of deal was going to happen. And the idea that the United States may pull out of Afghanistan, but it was going to leave about 4,000 soldiers. India's experience with Afghanistan has been that if even one American soldier remains in Afghanistan, then that is going to need a certain amount of cooperation from Pakistan. If you're telling me 4,000 soldiers are going to be inside Afghan bases, I would posit that there are a lot of assurances that Washington would need from Rawalpindi, which will complicate my position. It then becomes the best time when I have a political mandate, when I have an international situation that is not pushing back, and when I have a situation that might actually change my security perspective without anyone consulting me. I do what I need to do to feel more secure about my boundaries. So while this is not a case for what any government does, it is certainly a case that everyone must understand the entire regional perspective. Feeding into that, and I want to make this last point and I'll leave it there, is what we have discussed over the last few years, last few days, excuse me, feels like years, is the progression of conflict dynamics, the escalation of conflict dynamics between India and Pakistan. How quickly can it go to nuclear? How quickly is it going to be conventional? And I have to urge the audience, I know this sounds like the most well-worn theme, but I have to urge everyone here in India and in Pakistan to understand that if all of us are agreed that the trigger for any conflict between India and Pakistan will come from forces that either Pakistan cannot or will not control, then we have to look at that trigger closely. You speak about so many terrorists, and we've talked about terrorists in Kashmir, we've talked about terrorists other places. I'm making the case that just two would be a start. The two that are behind the three almost most iconic terror attacks on India. The IC-814 Kandahar hijack, where we saw Masood Azhar being exchanged for Indian hostages. The parliament attack, carried out by the same Masood Azhar. And the Mumbai attacks, carried out by Hafiz Saeed. These two leaders are not just UN Security Council sanctioned terrorists today. Their organizations are sanctioned by the UN Security Council. They're terrorists on the United States list. And yet, 20 years later, we don't see movement on even these two. If we don't see movement on even these two triggers, then how are we expecting to talk about what the escalation dynamics over a period of time will be when we aren't even taking care of point one? I'll leave it there.
Thank you. You get the award for staying only 1 minute over time compared to everyone else, but that's okay. All right. Last, Rabia.
All right, thank you.
And I'll ask you to stay, really, let's do 8 minutes.
Yes, I'll definitely try. So first of all, congratulations, Stimson, for completing your 30 years of excellence on everything South Asia and beyond. Before I start my formal comments, I would just like to, make a statement about what the Admiral had a passionate comment about A.Q. Khan. I don't know where that moment came from. I think statute of limitations on his crimes has long passed, and we need to move beyond that. With respect to the question posed, Samir, I would like also to confine myself to Kashmir because I don't think there is anything which needs more urgent attention at this point in time. Firstly, I think the Indian annexation of J&K did not come as a surprise to Pakistan. It was part of BJP's manifesto, and everybody knew that sooner or later this thing was going to come. Secondly, post-August 5th, I don't think India might have thought long about the consequences of their action, but I don't think they thought through as to what it was going to do with respect to the curfew, how long prolonged it would be, and what would happen once it is lifted. It's like that they went to conquer a land and they didn't know what to do with the people of that land, so they gagged them, they suspended their fundamental freedoms, all the while trying to convince themselves in the process that that is the right thing to do. The world is asking India if the decision is good for the people of Kashmir, then why don't you let them come out on the streets and tell you as to how good that decision is for them. Pakistan at the moment is extremely concerned about the fate of the 8 million Kashmiris who are suffering and who are raising their voices, are being taken and tortured. Those who would like to equate Pakistan-administered Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan with the situation need to revisit history. There is no equivalence, and I say there is no physical equivalence, and there is no moral equivalence here. Coming to the US, historically, the US has always shown high resolve as a third party to manage India-Pakistan crisis. And I've always been of that opinion that India and Pakistan have outsourced escalation control to the US, which gives them a lot of comfort to explore each other's red lines beyond the nuclear threshold, and that is dangerous. With Balakot strikes earlier, India tested another red line. Since there was not much condemnation from the international community, which our colleague Suhasini refers to, I believe that it has given India a false sense of confidence, that it's okay to attack Pakistan and that perhaps next time it can do it again. However, what it did not expect, or the international community did not expect, was the way Pakistan retaliated. Not enough credit is meted out to Pakistan's own role in crisis termination. I know it is not fashionable to do so here while sitting in Washington to give credit to Pakistan for anything, but I think it needs to be looked at as to how it did not go by the standard crisis playbook. Given that this current leadership in Pakistan has shown that it has both resolve and capability to respond to India at the time and space of its own choosing without going nuclear, new standard has been set, and I believe that needs to be appreciated. The line of control, as Feroz rightly mentioned, is on fire. We have been hearing news coming from Indian media every day saying that Jaish is training underwater. There are 200 plus militants that have entered the valley from I don't know where, especially when there is a huge number of Indian forces to protect all entry points. Pakistan's SSG commandos have been seen near the line of control. Some empty boats have been found in the Kutch area, and etc. The statements being made by Indian ministers, no less than the external minister, that have been referred by my colleagues, to gain jurisdiction across the line of control are highly irresponsible statements. It is sheer arrogance. It is hubris speaking. And India simply wants to create circumstances which I believe that will push Pakistan to accept the line of control as international boundary and accept India's decision as fait accompli. And we are moving in that direction whereby India will create such circumstances to push Pakistan or provoke Pakistan. That means war, like Feroz said, and that is what our Prime Minister has been saying to the rest of the world, that once two nuclear-armed countries will go to war, the entire world will suffer. It will not only be India and Pakistan who will bear the consequences of a fight that will escalate. There is an unprecedented crisis in this region, and the US, being the leader of the free world, I believe cannot just sit at the sidelines and see the human rights violations being perpetrated by India to the 8 million Kashmiris. Pakistan will go to every possible extent to exhaust diplomatic options, the first and foremost, pressuring the international community to create enough pressure on India to lift the curfew. The US, we believe, has a huge role to play here. President Trump has enormous power, whether anybody likes it or not. He is the president of the free world. He can attend the Howdy event in Houston next week, share the stage with Modi, but that is just a photo op. Trump could use that stage or the stage at the UNGA to tell the world that it worries about our region and suspension of fundamental freedoms in Kashmir and push India to lift the curfew. That is the only priority at the moment. But I'm being overly optimistic here. I guess after all the blitz is gone, the stark reality will still be facing us with Kashmiris under curfew and millions of people without medicines, healthcare, foods, and supplies that are critical to survive every day, and without communication with their loved ones and the world at large. My only question is, and this is that everybody should be asking India as to what is India afraid of? And why is India afraid of these 8 million Kashmiris that it had to shut them up? Forget about Article 370 or 35A, rightly so as pointed out by my colleagues here. this humanitarian emergency is reaching epic proportions, and it should be alarming everybody. Samir, I tell you that if these were animals trapped for over 40 days in a forest, every organization on this planet would be out there to rescue them. But these are people, and they need our help, and we need to do something to help them breathe. Thank you.
Well, that was much faster than I expected. Okay, so maybe I can actually get a question here before we open up to the audience, which is, several of you alluded to Afghanistan. As I mentioned earlier, I think for better or worse, that seems to consume the largest share of U.S. thinking and attention when it comes to South Asia, for the reasons that we have a troop presence there, an enduring troop presence there. And very recently, Suhasini alluded to the fact that we were almost at a point where we came to a deal with the Taliban that was potentially going to be signed at Camp David. If that had happened, or let's imagine a future where it might happen again in the future, where you see sort of a very significant U.S. drawdown to almost withdrawal from Afghanistan, what do you think that does to the other U.S. interests in the region? So I think I mentioned this at the beginning. It sounds like the United States has some big interests, which range from counterterrorism to nuclear stability, deterrent stability, to the balance of power in Asia. And, you know, there's this overarching theme of the free and open Indo-Pacific, rules-based order, the values sort of that the United States espouses. What do you think shakes out, and what becomes the priority for the United States once the U.S. withdraws, at least its force presence from the region? I'd be interested in a very quick response from each of you. And maybe we could start with Naseem and move down the line.
I guess two major issues for the U.S. One, to ensure that the region doesn't fall back into the same situation where Afghanistan is used as a hub for terrorism, etc. The other is so that US's own security is not threatened in any way. The other is obviously containment of China. That is something that remains important for the US, and there I think the US-Indian security arrangement, strategic arrangement gets reinforced. There's a big question mark about Pakistan-US relations, where that's headed. I don't think we have an answer to that as yet.
Yeah, you know, I very briefly mentioned that it's going to be a source of instability in that region. And I tried to elaborate on that to say that you've now got fertile breeding ground for greater amount of terrorism, which we would naturally be wary about, because we have a neighbor who's sponsoring these bad guys. That is one. It's not as a rebuttal. I sometimes wonder, there are 6 lakh, that is 600,000 Kashmiri Pandits who have been forced out of their livelihood, of their homes. Just to make it a little more gory, their wives raped, their children murdered, who are refugees within their own country, and this was caused by terrorism. So terrorism is something that worries us increasingly, and we believe, as Suhasini pointed out, hey, let's have a token act. Catch these two guys who've been central to most terrorist acts in India, act against them. After Pathankot, she again pointed out that join us in finding the bad guys. And that's not happening.
Yeah, just on
Well,
fact.
let's get to everyone here first,
Okay.
and then we'll come
I
back.
want to come back on fact
Ravi.
on it.
Yeah, so just very briefly, I think counterterrorism will remain a common interest for the United States. Even with withdrawal, they would still have some presence in Afghanistan. Pakistan welcomes the designation of TTP as a terrorist organization by the United States. This listing is very, very important for Pakistan, and earlier on BLA's listing. So I think we will always have that. And as long as Afghanistan is there and there is instability in the region, Pakistan does not want both its borders to be insecure, both its borders to be unstable. It is not in the national interest of Pakistan to keep these borders boiling, given as to what its own constraints are. So I think counterterrorism is where we will continue to have some work between India and America.
Brigadier Khan?
Well, I think your question is about Afghanistan's future. That's where the
My question
progress-
is really about what happens to sort of U.S. interests in the region post a world in which,
Well, what we know now is that there has been some sort of agreement with them, and those agreement essentially was that there was a timeline of withdrawal. There was a clear agreement that the Taliban would not house or would not support certain kind of terrorists, including Daesh is there. There's some remnants of Al-Qaeda is there, TTP is there, the Pakistan interest is there. So these are the people who will be eliminated in the process. The lockdown was on about intra-Afghan dialogue, and the sense was that, the Taliban is negotiating from a position of strength and they'll just take over there. And that's not good for anyone. Nobody wants that. Neither Pakistan nor anyone wants that kind of a situation to happen. So that's something is going to go into a protracted sort of a situation where minus the US, and the opinion, at least I know the opinion is divided in Pakistan, that some people think that American presence is the cause of the war. The others believe that without them is going to be a civil war. So, we are caught in these two sort of a dynamic. So there has to be a middle pathway, and that's why, by the way, it's not just Americans negotiating. Moscow is also negotiating on a platform. China is also doing
is very
that.
active.
So at one point, the international community, all five have to come together on the same page. And that, I would even dare say that the same position about Kashmir, sooner or later, you'll have to do that the same. Everybody has to come into this stake now. It's no longer going to be India-Pakistan alone problem, the way it is now moved.
Suhasini, you're shaking your head.
No, I'm just, I'm astounded by the difference between reality and what what everyone proposes. But the truth is, I'd like to know, actually, more than what happens to the U.S. interests in the region. I'd like to really know whether the U.S. has this grand plan to withdraw. We've heard it. We've seen negotiations over the last few years, and yet my understanding is that no one ever gives up space of strategic influence entirely. You don't just walk out. So that's the first thing. If that is the case, what are the kind of security guarantees the US is going to need per soldier in Afghanistan? That's one part of it. The second is this deal with the Taliban was nearly reached. There's no saying it will not be picked up. Hopefully it'll be after the election, so at least we'll allow the elections that space, because until just 2 months ago, the American ambassador to Kabul was actually telling people standing for election that they needed to be a little flexible when it came to their expectation that the elections would happen as scheduled. So it's what is the US commitment? Is it that because this deal has fallen through, it's not going to happen again, or is it going to? And if it requires that you are going to bring in members of the Taliban into government in Kabul, is that going to be some kind of a nominative process? Is democracy, as Afghanistan has seen it for the last few years, just going to be put away? Are the guarantees given to women over the last few years? I was looking at a video of a football match, a women's football match in Kabul yesterday. We all know what the history of the Taliban when it came to football fields was. So are we just going to give all that up? So my question is more that the US needs to think about what they plan to do with Afghanistan. There's no point informing the world with tweets and counter tweets about what you're doing today. It's what is the long-term strategy for the United States when it comes to Afghanistan? Okay, fine, India has been cut out of this process. We understand that. But don't cut Kabul out of the process. And expect that your regional interests are somehow going to remain. And I take Rabia's point that Pakistan does not want two unstable borders. In fact, I should remind you that it's 3, given that in the 1 week that we saw the Pulwama attack, Pakistan was accused of sending terrorists across the border by Iran and Afghanistan as well. So yeah, by all means, let's not have these unstable borders. Let's go after the terrorists. I've named 2. I'm sure there are more. But I do think that the United States needs to come out with some kind of a central policy. In 2017, there was a South Asia policy announced by President Trump. That South Asia policy had 3 pillars to it. It was that the US was not going to allow timelines to decide its presence in Afghanistan. That Pakistan was going to be put on notice when it came to terrorism and cross-border terrorism in particular. and that India and the government of Kabul were going to be an integral part of this process. I would posit to you that each of those have gone away. When it came to the talks process that Ambassador Khalilzad led, we were told there were 4 pillars, and those involved a ceasefire, those involved an intra-Afghan dialogue, those involved commitments on terrorism, and those involved an American withdrawal. I think only the American withdrawal was partially negotiated and a deal was announced. But I'd like to know what happened to the ceasefire? What happened to the intra-Afghan dialogue? How can you get to a deal without like 3 of the 4 pillars of that dialogue being completed? So I'd post the question back.
Okay, well, you also referenced long-term strategy, and I think there might be debates even in Washington about whether we have the capacity for long-term war strategy in this. But that's for probably another event. I want to make sure we get some questions from the audience. So we're going to do 2 rounds of 3 questions, and we'll bundle them together and give very quick opportunities for everyone. So I'm going to start, I'm going to go from right to left. So I saw Nagin. Why don't you go ahead first? And I lost my pen. We don't have a microphone here, do we? Okay, so you're gonna ask the question. I'm gonna have to paraphrase it back for the online audience. But why don't you go ahead? We'll start with you.
Sure. This is primarily for Suhasini.
Sorry, and can you introduce yourself briefly, at least for the rest of the group?
Sure. Nagin Kazami, Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. Thanks, Samir, for organizing all of these great events this week. So questions primarily for Vijay and Suhasini, but obviously interested in anyone's kind of comments. I completely understand the commonly voiced frustration that Indians feel about the repeated attacks, their citizens and their country subjected to. And, I understand the desire to see Pakistan take action, particularly against these 2 leaders, that you referenced, Suhasini, so Hafiz Saeed and Masood Azhar. I'm wondering what you imagine the incentive structure Pakistan is facing to be, in which that could look attractive. Like, what interest do you see Pakistan having, or how would you hope to generate an interest in actually moving against those leaders, particularly given kind of the current state of the region and the implications of Article 370, et cetera?
Okay, I'm gonna take 2 more questions, and we'll turn it over to the audience. This gentleman here in the middle, just go ahead and introduce yourself and pose a question.
My name's Uqab Malik. I'm currently a program scholar at the University of Rajasthan. Nobody spoke about this. I'm not surprised. Nobody really mentions the rights of Kashmir as an independent entity in itself. And I think the Kashmiris need some support in that respect. But if you ask them, maybe, look at the diaspora, I grew up in England, amongst many Kashmiris, although not one myself, that they would prefer to be independent.
Yeah.
But they're pulled apart by geopolitical concerns of different countries, much like the Kurds have for centuries. And so you can all talk about your own particular positions as far as Pakistan and India are concerned, but nobody's really cared an iota about Kashmir. And given that the borders have been changing historically for thousands of years, there's nothing to stop that occurring again. So just a line of control coming a meter or 2 either way won't make an ounce of difference to the Kashmiris. I think they want their independence.
Great, thank you for that. And the third question, let's go to Marvin here. And Marvin, if you take the microphone, you pose it.
Marvin Weinbaum, the Middle East Institute. A comment which leads to the question. As I've been listening here, I've been both informed and depressed. Informed because you all are very informed people yourselves. But what I've heard essentially here is arguments that I have heard made by Pakistanis and Indians for oh so long. I saw you making the case that we have become accustomed to hearing. So my question is, you met for 3 days. Can you share with us where you had common ground, where you felt that you did more than talk to and past one another?
That's a great question, Marvin. So let's turn it over to the panelists. The 3 questions are: what are the incentive structures for Pakistan to go after Masood Azhar and Hafiz Saeed, the rights of the Kashmiris, and where do we see any common ground in either what we discussed previously or today? And How should we start? Should we just go? We'll go down this way then. So who has to start first?
Incentive structures, I mean, I'm really a little baffled, you know. These are UN Security Council sanctioned terrorists. Pakistan has in recent times, because it keeps changing what case it has against these two individuals, but in the most recent case, has not only put Hafiz Saeed, you know, under the MPO, which is normally the maintenance of public order, but has actually made a case on terror financing against him. I don't know, how do you incentivize a state to act against terrorists that it acknowledges are in its own territory? I think it should be for the good of Pakistan, that Pakistan should want to take care of these terrorists. Because as I said, we're not just talking about two individuals, and yes, there are so many more, and there are other triggers as well. I'm talking about the two leaders who have caused the triggers for each of the conflict escalations that we've been speaking about over the last 20 years. It's not a very long period. I think it shouldn't be so hard to explain, and I certainly don't believe that anyone should need to be incentivized to act against terrorists on their own soil. I mean, who are they the biggest threat to then?
Rose, you want to take the next crack at any of these questions?
No, I sort of agree with Swasini on this. There is no reason for...
So we're answering the common ground one too.
Yeah, there's a common ground. These are the two people who have been under some kind of a custody, trial, international, so there's just no doubt there should be a due process done and over with. And the longer that stays, there's one grievance between India and Pakistan that's going to continue for that. But have to say something that might surprise you. That's not going to satisfy India. That's the whole thing. Even if they are put on the gallows, what next? There will be some other issue between India and Pakistan. So that one issue at least can be put there, which I agree that there has to be a justice done. But we're not sure whether that's going to settle the issue. That's the only.
Robbie?
Yeah, earlier it was talked about the trigger points and identification of Masood Azhar and Hafiz Saeed. Add Kulbhushan Jadhav to the list as well. So there are grievances on both sides with respect to terrorism. Terrorism is not...
But has Yadav triggered a terrorist attack, cross-border terrorist attack?
Was about to if it had not been caught. It's just that not because the terrorist attack has happened doesn't mean that it's not in the works. So, but that's besides the point. I just wanted to add terrorists to the list. To Akaub's question about as to what do the Kashmiris want, I completely agree. Because India and Pakistan keep missing them in the process, and they keep holding on to their positions, and that's the unfortunate ground reality. If the situation goes back to status ante post August 5th, which I personally believe that it's not going to, because this is going to normalize in time, and everybody will have to accept it, given the way the international order works, Kashmiris will still be caught in between India and Pakistan. And lastly, about common ground, and for that, like I said, there's plenty of grievances on both sides. But it does not mean that there is not room to talk. At the height of the crisis, Imran Khan releasing Abhinandan, and then again offering peace overtures. For some, you could be an Indian and be dismissive about the whole thing. It was not for the optics or the show of it. I think here is this one person which is trying to rise above a level and create a space for his own self to be seen independently, and believes in peace, believes to give peace a chance, and is being dismissed as mere optics by his counterparts, by everybody around the world. So we need to find some space. The space exists. It's just that there's too much fog to see that space at this present moment. Thank you.
Yeah, on this matter of incentivizing, I think two former secretaries of state encapsulated a very appropriate answer. One, you'll get rid of a migraine. Two, you'll get rid of venomous snakes in your backyard. And that sort of sums it up. I'm not going to give you a packet of goodies because you got rid of the snake or the migraine. It's for your own health sake. As far as the Kashmiris are concerned, yes, that is the issue. How can we bring about a state where where the people of Kashmir enjoy the freedoms as enjoyed by the rest of India? that is the state that we would be aiming for. Nobody's aiming for anything else. What was the last point?
By the way, you don't do that by subduing the local population and killing them.
Okay, well,
we talked about this. I've already mentioned.
Okay, well, we're gonna have to move on from there. Naseem, I'm gonna give you one last shot at this.
No, which was the
set of
last
questions.
point?
It was common ground, but I'm not sure.
Ah, yes.
You wanna
yesterday,
take it?
yesterday, Firoz showed me a Bollywood song that he was singing, which I quite enjoyed. So there is common ground.
Naseem.
There's people to people.
Naseem.
Yeah, I think 2 or 3 things very quickly. I've been hearing about terrorism, Pakistan sponsoring terrorism, etc. Ajit Doval, the National Security Advisor of India, go on Google and you'll see his video in which he talks about being an undercover agent and basically promoting anti-Pakistan activities in Pakistan. So let's not get moral about something which is a tool that policy makers have used in our region. India must not forget 1971. We made our blunders in 1971. India was the country which first promoted cross-border terrorism. 71, LTT, let's not forget those things. In terms of 20 people dying or 2 people dying, and the fact is in South Asia, nobody deserves to die because of terrorism, but let's not forget there's hardly any major military headquarters in Pakistan, whether it's military, whether it is Air Force, whether it is Navy, which has not been attacked, and dozens of people have died and families have died. So let's not, it's not one-upmanship on terrorism. Pakistan has suffered and India has caused that terrorism as well. So it's not reducing it to one individual or 2 individuals. And I think that we must all open our eyes to the reality that unresolved Kashmir will continue to, this problem will fester, and 2 people on earth so similar, so close, and I really believe that Pakistan, India deserve to be closer, deserve better cooperation, etc. But the fact is that this is the reality in terms of Kashmir itself, and the Kashmiris. In fact, I think that there is a debate in Pakistan as well. There is no doubt about it. I think Kashmiris come first. Kashmiris and Kashmir is about Kashmiris, not about India and Pakistan. Also, let me remind you that on the Pakistan Constitution, I think Article 257 or 157 clearly states that, and remember that the UN resolution is about, so Hasni, I was glad you were referring to UN resolutions, regarding, yes, you did.
I did.
No, I think you did. No, not about Kashmir. You did about these 2 terrorists, whatever. You said
UNSC
Yeah,
sanctions.
so Kashmir is also about UNSC resolutions. So anyway, so we agree on that. So what I'm saying is that the UNSC resolutions give Pakistan, the Kashmiris, the right, as you know, either to join India or Pakistan. However, having said that, obviously times have changed and a third option should be there. But in Pakistan's constitution, it says very clearly that in case Kashmiris decide to join Pakistan, Kashmiris will decide the kind of government they want. I just wanted to add that as a fact, but I'm completely with you. Kashmir is about Kashmiris. It cannot be about India and Pakistan. But the fact is that because of history, these 2 countries are party to something that is about the Kashmiris.
I'll just add one quick thing, which is that the last time I was in the Kashmir Valley was 2 years ago. A prominent politician pointed out to me that actually both India and Pakistan are fairly disingenuous about their concern for the Kashmiris, and that there is a perverse equilibrium where both sides, well, I wouldn't say profit, but have strategic benefits from sort of the state of conflict there. So I take your point that everyone sort of speaks on behalf of them, and at the same time, I think they behave as states do, which is sort of to manipulate sort of politics for their own ends. All right, so I want to take 3 more quick questions, and then we will get the last word in from the panel. Tessie has been waiting very patiently, so why don't you start off?
Thank you.
Can you just wait for the mic? Sorry.
Casey Schaefer with McClarty Associates. There is a wonderful expression, the best is the enemy of the good. And I think official India and official Pakistan, and to some extent, the people we've heard this morning have been kind of imprisoned by their historical positions, which I would define as the best from their perspective, and have therefore made it even harder to reach some kind of improvement. But let me just tick off a few of the bows in the direction of reality, which is I would urge you to think of as the point from which we have to start. You have to understand the history, but you can't be trapped in it. One is, I was very much struck by Feroz's discussion of the military dynamics, which was actually a rather chilling discussion, but worth thinking about because that's the future you don't want. I was also struck by the comments about the Kashmiris. I worry a little bit about fighting to the last Kashmiri, which I think has happened more than once in the history of that unhappy place. And I think, I was interested in Suhashini's comment that you could start with 2 terrorists. You're probably right, Feroz, that that wouldn't be considered enough. But if at some point India and Pakistan can swallow hard, take a collective deep breath, and sit down quietly and talk, 2 might become a starting point to open a conversation. And it's worth looking at not just the end point, which in a sense I think one can vaguely discern through the fog, but what the starting points might be.
Those are great comments. So we're going to take 2 more. This gentleman over here, Grace, at the very end on the other side, and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, my name is Farouk Kathwari. I've been involved with, hi Tazy. I've been involved with, and Tazy Schaefer, Ambassador Schaefer has been also involved with the Kashmir Study Group, which some of you might be aware of. I happened to be in Washington yesterday attending a meeting. In fact, Ambassador Schaefer was part of it. So when I heard about this, I said I better make a point of coming here because I wanted to listen to the Indian and the Pakistani perspectives. As I've heard, nothing much has changed. And when we started the Kashmir Study Group, and in fact some of your associates were there, Admiral Nair from India, General Arif from Pakistan, you folks may, or Naz Naik, S.K. Singh, these were the ones who had been asked by their governments to come to discuss at that stage. Initially, we spent 2 days basically talking of the same Pakistani-Indian situations. Same thing, terrorism, line of control, plebiscite, and all that stuff. After that, we said we got to find a sensible way out of this mess.
4 points.
And we used 3, please stop me if I'm going too far, but too much time. But we said we will find a solution based on, it's got to be peaceful, it's got to be perceived as honorable, and it's got to be feasible. And that meant a lot of the perception of the past could not be used. So, and we came with ideas, which is that the people of Kashmir should be given a right to live in dignity. I was there about just 4 days before the clampdown. I'm from Kashmir. And we had a family wedding. After 3 or 4 days we left, there was a clampdown. And our families, my brothers, sisters, everybody else is under house arrest. 2,000 plus Kashmiris, including leaders who pro-India, are in jails. This is a disaster. So we've got to find a sensible way out of it. And the sensible way is, if you folks have done some, if you would like to, so take a look at the work of the Kashmir Study Group. And a lot of work was done, and it was agreed. In fact, I had lots of meetings with General Musharraf, Prime Minister Vajpayee, and others. And in principle, they agreed to the idea that Kashmiri region should be given an opportunity of self-governance. We Kashmiris in the valley would like to be independent, but that's not, unfortunately, a feasible situation because India and Pakistan will have a tough time accepting it. The objective was to make them understand that self-governance with dignity will be important, and both Indian and Pakistanis, to a great degree, agreed that. A lot of other things happened. So there is an opportunity. And this today, we have, crisis creates an opportunity. And the opportunity here is to find a solution. Because if we get caught up in the fact of that all we're going to talk about is terrorism, you're not going to end it. There are going to be people who will be constantly, if one person is going to hold hostage, or 10 people are going to hold hostage, you're never going to end it. there is an opportunity of finding a sensible, feasible solution. And I think that's where the focus should be. Thank you very much.
So, I'm going to actually just cut it off at there because I think those two calls for pragmatism are quite good ways to sort of end that. And I'll turn it over to the panelists to ask you to reflect on sort of those calls for pragmatism. So we'll go back the other way. So, Naseem, do you mind starting? And we'll take one final set of comments, as brief as possible.
Yeah, I'd like to basically pick up from where Mr. Farooq Katwari left, and I don't know how many people here know Mr. Farooq Katwari. He's done a lot of work, a lot of ground path-breaking work on Kashmir, and the 4 points that were being discussed, General Musharraf proposed, those were based on the work that his group did, and personally, I always believed until 370 it was repealed. And so, Azay, just on that, it's not like Pakistan believed in 370 and was so disappointed. It was just the fact that India, that was the kind of final cut on the issue, and it seemed like India had gotten Kashmir to a point of no return. That's the concern when we talk about 370. So personally, the concern is that 370 has it brought the situation to a dead end, that it takes us towards what Feroz talks about, or is there still opportunity to go towards the 4 points? Because personally, I believe that the solution to the Kashmir is a process-oriented solution, that it is an issue, that it is an unresolved issue, that it is not internal to India, that it is internal, that it is an issue which is an international issue, but bilateral certainly. And the path forward certainly was the path that first Musharraf and Vajpayee and Nawaz Sharif moved ahead on, and then Musharraf and Vajpayee. And it's unfortunate that, we don't have time, so we can't go into details as to why we've got where we did, but certainly August 5 has got us to a dead point. So the big question is whether we'll head Feroz's way or Mr. Farooq Katwari's way. But unless there's some sea change in India, if there's enough criticism, no, I'm wrong. I think there's enough support for Mr. Modi. So will there be an international pressure? Will the Kashmiris rise up in a way that the international community will have to focus? Will Pakistan get active in a way that the international community will focus? That's the point. And my sense is that maybe things will go in Farooq's direction, in Feroz's direction, to take us then to Mr. Katwari's direction.
Okay. Admiral Shankar, last.
Yeah, just thank you for those wonderful observations you made. But unfortunately, we are dealing with countries. On the one hand, you have a country who has lost credibility as far as issues of agreements are concerned. The fact of you quoting the Pakistani constitution, I was at a loss. Is it the 58 one, 60? We don't know which one you were talking about. That having been left aside, the major issue of credibility is peace talks. Where has it got us so far? Because a politician is very, very street smart. He doesn't want to wager on a lame horse. He'd never do that. Vajpayee, a statesman in his own right, when he went into Lahore, was a victim of just that. That you have a declaration and the ink is not dry and there's an invasion going on. Now you may say it is some scatterbrained scheme of some maniac or whatever it is, but it was the state that did it. And to a politician, that is credibility. We talk about America. America's long talked about the duplicity in dealing with Pakistan. These are all facts. This is reality. And we have to deal with the real world. I do agree that a solution has to be found. It has to be a very an amicable solution, and the fact of excellent being the worst enemy of good is actually a Russian saying, which it's absolutely right.
There's another phrase which is good enough for government work.
Yeah, unfortunately, we work at I'm not in the government, I'm retired. We work somewhere between the lowest common denominator and perhaps we aim a little higher. We would like to reach for the stars. I mean, I'm getting very subjective about it. We would like all freedoms to be available to all people. Why just Kashmiris? But I'm afraid at the moment it's not a realistic vision.
Okay, Rabia, I'm going to give you each 1 minute now because we're
Yeah.
going to wrap up.
I think the opportunity lies in the type of leadership Pakistan has today, and it should be given a chance. But it needs to be. It's not a one-way street. If one leader believes in peace, wants to give peace a chance, and the other leader is on his high horse and is arrogant and has the mandate to back it, this discussion is never going to happen. You would wish IK and Imran Khan and Modi to shake hands at UNGA, but do you think that's going to happen? So we need to move past egos in order to explore space where both countries can come together. And I think people-to-people contact between India and Pakistan has always worked before. And that is also one area, as a pressure group, we, the people of India, and we, the people of Pakistan, and the people of Kashmir, can generate enough momentum. We just haven't tried it enough yet. So I think there is space to work there. Thank you.
Rose?
Somehow there is a Feroz formula here. I wish I can want to clarify that. Look, we're talking about August 5 onwards, and I was talking about the reaction. The military planning, strategic thinking is based on intent and capability. When 3 cabinet ministers show their intent, after August 5th, everybody's mind at least would be, what is the next step? Well, the next step was made clear by the Indian cabinet ministers. You think military planning would be just sitting quietly and not doing that? They are doing this contingency planning for them. They have to do all this planning. What does this actually mean in military terms? I only translated that. There's certain things that are happening. If Indian garrisons on Pakistan border are increasing, Pakistani garrisons would not be sleeping. They would be doing the same thing. That's what I meant by 45. And if there's intentions to take them, they will be doing all that. And if that happens, I just saw sort of a future that this is going to be a sort of a fortified border with having skirmishes all the time, surgical strike and beyond that. Because that's what it means, salami slice. These are not my words. These are all written in Indian tactical books that we have been studying for past 30 years. Salami slice tactics. These are not my own words. So I only said what was there. I didn't mean to disappoint. I would love what Mr. Okabe said and Mr. Katwari. This would go, but that's not the situation as of now. To the world, it appears the international reaction is indicative that the world would want to accept India's action as fait accompli. I have to say it bluntly. So for Pakistan, if they have to react on that basis, the reality. We can talk about, we can go back in negotiations, but as of now, it doesn't look like a very nice situation. I can talk about very great utopian situation, but that doesn't look now. As of today, September. That's it.
Yeah, I would urge you to look much closer at reality because we live in a world and we have to take that world as we find it. And the truth is that you are likely to see much more of a signal going out this weekend when the US president stands shoulder to shoulder with the Indian Prime Minister, regardless of Rabia's uncharitable description of just one leader, which I don't think is fair, since we can all characterize leaders in different ways. But the truth is, you will see the reality. You will see the reality in the next week at the United Nations. And I think you have to accept that that is what we are working with. It is the world we are working in. If the United States can stand over there and say that India and Pakistan must learn to overcome their differences, but the United States itself walks out of an 8-member multilateral agreement with Iran, then I'm not really taking my clues from what the US says or anyone says, but what they do. If Pakistan is upset about the condition of Kashmiris and this characterization of animals in a forest, which I find a bit strange, and is not concerned about what is happening across its frontiers with China and in Xinjiang, then I have to go by the fact that there is a duality over there which I'm not able to explain. So I don't want to open new boxes. You did ask for some positive comments, and I will make them. I don't see at the present the possibility of or the likelihood of dialogue, and yet India and Pakistan always surprise us. The truth is that they have a capacity to change very, very quickly. It's only less than a year when the Prime Minister of India referred to the Kartarpur corridor as, and likened it to the coming down of the Berlin Wall. We do know that that Kartarpur corridor conversation has continued through a very difficult year in talks between them. So I would urge you to look not just at the fact that those talks have continued, why has Pakistan continued to make its outreach on the Kartarpur corridor, why has India continued to meet Pakistan on that issue, even when it's not meeting Pakistan on any other issue. The second, I would certainly say, Kulbhushan Jadhav, who has been mentioned, is an opportunity. It does not help Pakistan's cause to execute him or to put him, or to put an end to him after an extremely, shall we say, non-transparent trial. And it is an opportunity for both sides to find a way to make a deal when it's about that case. And I certainly will go back to the question of the two terrorists and say that you have another opportunity there. And it is an opening for whatever people would hope to try and do. When it comes to Kashmiris, I definitely think that we firstly have to define what we mean by Kashmir, because the entire state of Jammu and Kashmir also counts. The truth is, as I said, as a journalist, I cannot condone clampdowns, restrictions on people, or detentions of politicians. But I will say over here that the truth is that it is never just one situation that you can look at, especially when it comes to our region, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you for that. There's a concept in intelligence studies of the self-negating prophecy. And that is, you predict an event that might happen and it triggers certain strategic adjustments by others and yourself such that it prevents that event from happening. And I think at least what the Stimson Center has been interested in for quite a while, something that Michael Crapon has been dedicated for the last 30 years to doing, is talking about the risks and challenges of competition, crisis, and conflict, not just in South Asia, but around the world, in the hopes that it precipitates strategic adjustments and calculations that prevent those worst things from happening. And so, as contentious as this conversation has been, I still think it's a step in the right direction of making us at least aware and attentive and possibly adjusting to those realities. So for that, I thank the panelists for joining us today. Thank you all for your participation, and for those who are watching on the live stream. Stimson has been doing this for 30 years, and I hope we'll be doing it for another 30 years in the future. Thank you.
So now going to discuss the U.S. trades